All right, friends, we're back to cover Venus in another episode. This one is about Venus and the sign of Aries. If you have this in your birth chart as a birth signature, this video will apply. And it also applies to the current transit of 2025, where Venus is going to station in the sign of Aries at 10 degrees, move backwards into Pisces, and then forward to cover its shadow degrees until it passes that 10-degree mark, and eventually it makes it back to its lovely home of Taurus. And if you guys are interested, go back to my last 4 videos. I've talked extensively about Venus in the sign of Pisces and this retrograde. So we're going to shift our focus mostly on Venus and the sign of Aries. And with that said, let us begin. All right, so I'm just going to very quickly go through some of the significations and symbols related to Venus and the sign of Aries, so you guys get a feel for why I'm going to make the first statement that I'm going to make, that Venus in the sign of Aries has a lot of dissonance. And you'll see from the symbols, but I'll explain them as we go along. So let's start with Venus, and I'll put her on the side of the screen here. Venus represents femininity. It's the feminine principle, so it's inward moving and it's receptive. The moon has a similar quality. Connections and unions, such as love and marriage, is about cooperation. Venus is all about cooperation. I mean, when we think about Venus's other sign, the sign of Libra, that's what it's all about. And then in the sign of Taurus, Venus also has this kind of resonance when it's with its own sign, because itself is related to loyalty, fidelity, stability. Venus also represents beauty and beautiful things, objects of wealth. It represents art and learning the skill sets to be artistic. Venus is about health, fertility, sensual pleasures. So these are some of the significations of Venus. Now, when we go to the sign of Aries, pay attention. It's almost like flipping something on its head suddenly. So Venus was about femininity and the feminine principle right away. Aries is about masculinity and the masculine principle. And in fact, we could say the sign of Aries, from all the 3 fire signs, which are Leo and Sag also, this is the hyper-masculine sign from all of them. So it's self-moving. It's about self-determination. Remember, Venus was about cooperation. Aries is inceptive, initiative. It's about energy and being energetic, penetrative. It's about individuality. It's very self-oriented, the sign of Aries. And in this way, it's about independence, self-reliance, strength, bravery, adventure, and passion. So almost all of it is in some kind of a dissonance. We will see that there will be some connections, and there are life lessons that we can learn throughout a lifetime because we have this signature in our chart, or through this transit. But let's start with describing what some of this dissonance is about when we get Venus in the sign of Aries. One of the first things to remember, Venus, the goddess of love, is going to a sign that belongs to Mars, the god of war. And there's going to be a natural tension here, because if you think about what love is about connection and merging. It's coming together this way. What is Mars generally trying to do? It's taking out his sword, sever and cut things, create disconnection. So right off the bat, we have a strong dissonance at the core root of their objective. And then we can take that notion of masculine and feminine as a kind of a prominent dissonance between these 2 energies melding and mixing, because the feminine principle represents receptivity, connection, and cooperation. And Mars, on the other hand, wants to be inceptive, initiating, forward-moving. It's about individuality, self-determination, self-assertion, and always prioritizing action to move forward and to assert itself rather than cooperate with other people. This fundamental contrast is creating a dissonance. It's like being in a relationship where your value system is very different than your partner. And at every point, whatever that comes out, because those underlying values are different, there's conflict and tension between this couple, right? Venus is keep telling Mars, come on, let's compromise and let's cooperate. Let's somehow merge together. And Mars's drive can't hear this. It's about, I want to be independent. I need to assert myself in this situation. So it creates dissonance and conflict. And then their motion types are very different. always emphasizing on planets having a type of emotion because it allows us to conceptualize their actions or what it is that they're trying to do. That receptivity of Venus, because of being of that feminine principle, is inward moving. And Venus has this kind of a magnetic, attractive thing to it that can stand there passively and it can attract things to itself. And by the virtue of this attracting, establishing connections, unions, merging, it's doing all of this. And this is, if you go back to the Pisces videos, this is one of the reasons why Venus is exalted in the sign of Pisces. It goes into Pisces, everything's merging already, and Venus as this field of interaction that is about magnetism and attraction, everything naturally comes together and merges. But when it comes into the sign of Aries, into Mars's sign, Mars doesn't stand still, especially the sign of Aries. It's constant forward moving, so its motion's outwards, it's inceptive, it's igniting, it's initiating, and it's trying to create conquest. So Venus is receptively waiting for things to come to it, and the sign of Aries is like, I need to go out and conquer that thing. Mars also has this nature. So in some ways, we can see that Venus here is trying to create sustainability in relationship, like that thing of loyalty and fidelity, whereas Mars has this drive for pursuit, and not to mention the impulse to separate and to assert its own freedom and individuality at all times. So again, a huge dissonance between these two energies. And then we can look at how Venus is so enduring and Mars has this passionate quality, which this can actually become a kind of a resonance. But there's some degree of disconnect and tension here too, because Venus is constantly emphasizing that let's harmonize, let's cooperate, let's make something beautiful together. And Mars's dynamic energy, which is infused in the sign of Aries, and Aries has the same quality, is about let's go on an adventure, let's take a risk, let's put it all on the line. Through that passion and that fire that's in it, it's just constantly prioritizing immediate action. And if you think about it, if you're constantly prioritizing immediate action, you're also looking for immediate gratification. Whereas Venus has that sense of sustainability to it. It can endure. You know, we see a lot of this in the sign of Taurus in terms of Venus's qualities. So that spontaneity and the risk-taking thing that's in Aries, it rubs Venus the wrong way. So it gets the script from Aries and it's like, wow, this is so against my own nature. I don't even know what to do with this. And then there's another thing too that's difficult here is that Venus is constantly prioritizing union and relationships, love. That's what it's about. That's its own inherent script in its own hand about what itself is. And it comes to a sign that is very individualistic and it's very independent. And Aries sign is constantly like, I need to be self-reliant. Whereas Venus is constantly asking to do things together. So the script is forcing Venus to compromise its cooperative and compromising nature to just be in the pursuit, to be self-reliant. This is a difficult thing to do for Venus in the sign of Aries. And then not to mention the sign of Aries, because the ruler is Mars, it can become competitive even in relationships, where Venus is like, come on, babe, we'll do it together. Mars is like, no, Aries is like, I'll do it myself. So again, great contrast in terms of value systems and in terms of how they approach life and how to proceed in life. And another thing worth remembering, Venus is about beauty, like jewelry, makeup. I mean, we can think about these things in terms of something that's superficial, but is an act of adornment, is an act of care, is an act of love. And on a deeper level, when we think about Venus being related to arts, and we generally think arts as something that's beautiful, it's because of the proportion, the harmonizing factors in that composition that's giving rise to something that we perceive as beauty. Mars, on the other hand, by its own very nature, is very simplistic. Mars is just like go from point A to B, and its own sign has this kind of a feel too. So it's like that soldier who will be happy with a can of beans over fire and just eating it out of that can, even with its own hand. It's a little bit savage in that way. Whereas Venus is just wants to have a bit of etiquette and it wants to express its sense of beauty. And it comes into a sign that's acting like this. So again, it's going to become very off script for Venus. So I just wanted to bring some of the dissonance into your attention, but we're not done yet because Venus in the sign of Pisces, it's in its exaltation. In the sign of Aries, Venus is in its fall. I mean, opposing the sign of Aries is Libra, which is Venus's actual sign. So it's almost as if Venus is very far from home. It's like being on the opposite side of Earth, where home is. And it's in an environment that also doesn't support it. That's why I started talking about some of the dissonance between between Venus and the sign of Aries. So Venus is not well supported in the sign of Aries. And this fall in some traditions is called as a detriment, or the planet being in exile. And it's simply because it's in exile, because it's opposite of its own domicile, is opposite of its own home in the sign of Aries. Libra is its own home. And let's just consider this for a second. When Venus is at home in the sign of Libra, opposing the sign of Aries, Venus can establish harmony, balance, relationships, cooperation, and it has a lot of diplomacy when it's in the sign of Libra. And that's the way it wants to be. That's what Venus is about. It complements Venus in terms of how it wants to be beautiful and to create beautiful things, to be fair, and to create connections and unions. And then when it comes into the sign of Aries, where it's in its exile or fall, the sign is asking it, be assertive, be an individual, be action-oriented, be self-asserting. And it's just, these are not the natural tendencies. You know, there's a selfish orientation in the sign of Aries in some ways. We're supposed to take care of our own. We're supposed to pull ourselves up by our own bootstrap, and it's for ourselves. And this concept is foreign to Venus. In many ways, Venus would perceive the sign of Aries as being over-aggressive. I mean, that thrill-seeking aspect of Aries is not something that resonates with the nature of Venus. So again, we have to take into consideration that Venus is in its fall. And the next topic that we have to consider when we talk about Venus in the sign of Aries is related to the cardinal nature of Aries. I'm going to take a short break. I'll be right back. Okay, guys, I'm back. Back to the cardinal thing. And in that short break, I was thinking, share a little bit of a personal story. I don't have Venus in Aries. My Venus is in Taurus, but I have Moon in the sign of Aries. And in some ways, there's some similarities because both Venus and Moon are the feminine principles. And ever since I was a child, I had this deep desire to one day feel just comfortable. There's no comfort in some ways with Moon in Aries. And it's related to this cardinal aspect of the sign. Like when I wake up in the morning, I know I'm going to be home all day. I will look exactly as I look right now. It's always like ready to go. There's this thought that I always need to be ready to go. There's always this thought of what's the next thing I have to do. So just to be like in my PJs and just chill and wear big socks and put a big blanket over me, it doesn't feel right because this feminine principle, the moon, the mind, is forced to almost be like a soldier, just erect like this and ready to take the orders of the day. And that cardinal aspect of the sign of Aries is creating this feeling, as I just said. And like Libra is a cardinal sign too, but it's going to have a different kind of initiating qualities than Aries, this action-oriented sign. The sign of Aries is the biggest initiating sign of all the 12 signs. It's all about let's go now, let's do it. There's a sense of impulsivity to Aries because of this. So Aries is characterized by action and to just set new things into motion constantly. Aries is like a sprinter who just sprints full speed, needs to stop for a second because it does burn itself out, and then doof, another spurt. That's how it's constantly initiating something new. Cardinal signs in general want to initiate motion and movement to a new direction, but Aries really takes us over the top. So its motion is very dynamic, it's bold, it's energetic, and it just wants to constantly be ignited. It's like a burst of energy forth. Think about it. The sign of Aries falls into spring, right? Think about spring. It's like everything's dead right before it. And then suddenly you come out one morning and a bunch of trees have blossomed back into life. That bursting forth and initiating a new season is very much related to how Aries functions. So it's got an energetic drive behind it. It's self-determined, self-initiated, it's independent, and it just wants to jump in head first, like the ram. You know, the ram's always leading with its head to move forward. That's the kind of motion and the new initiation and new beginning that Aries is trying to create. So when Venus comes into the sign of Aries, that's the script it gets. And if you think about it, when we want to harmonize with other people and when we're cooperating with them, it takes time. It takes a lot of back and forth. Take 2 steps forward, take 1 step back, go right, go left. Aries is like forward. This is her objective. That's the way we're moving. So Venus's script is that you have to be initiating. And as I was saying earlier, Venus has that receptive feel where it can actually stand still, can even be a little bit passive, and it's attracting things to itself. It's not a sprinter, it's not a runner. And then suddenly the script is like, be action oriented, be proactive, act now. And another thing, Venus is constantly relying on sensual intuition almost, you know, feminine receptive principles, or relying on feelings and emotions to feel things out. And then here the script is like, you got to be vigorous. You just act and then you figure it out through the action. This is a contradiction for this planet. It makes Venus lose its sense of patience almost. The kind of patience that it needed to exert to see what it can attract to itself. Now it's got to go into pursuit of getting it for itself. So the role is inherently uncomfortable. And the sign of Aries, as I was saying, is very quick. Everything's just quick moving. So Venus, the planet that's about creativity and beauty, when we insert the idea of quickness, it's not for Venus to create some lasting result, unions and connections anymore. It becomes about gratification. It takes away that pleasure and that comfort that Venus would want to experience here. There's a thing about beauty, you know, we see something beautiful, we take a minute. There's a sigh, we inhale, and then there's an exhale. Aries does not permit this. And then when we take this in the realm of relationship, which is the realm of Venus, attach these 2 words together, quick relationships, instant gratification from connections. So Venus has to become thrill-oriented in relationship rather than trying to build something and sustain it. That loyalty and fidelity that's related to Venus. So it's constantly just chasing new experiences. That's the script that Venus has got. That's what it's got to do in the sign of Aries. Aries doesn't give it that enduring and cultivating space. It's just like, grow now, do now, just go get the crop. Don't worry about it. Doesn't have to grow. Just go get another one. That's the kind of feeling that Venus gets in the sign of Aries. And then Venus and Aries can jump into relationships super quickly without evaluating anything, like consequences of what does it mean to be with this person. Act now, think later will become the motto. So the pattern that this creates is that the person falls in love super quickly and then they fall out of love very fast too. The passion just fizzles out. It's full on, that burst, that sprint of I'm all in, and then I am all out. I need to rest. I need to sit. I can't do this. So in some ways, we could say Venus becomes a little bit impulsive when it comes to relationships. And like all planets, I say this in many videos, we live and learn. It doesn't mean because you have the signature in your charts or by transit right now that this is our lot forever. It's just, these are the things that a person comes to experience. Going back to that Gundanta point or the critical degree, the knots that a person needs to unknot and untie in this life are related to these kinds of modes and ways of being. Here, the person's supposed to learn, how do you actually establish deep connections? Like, take that passion that's in Aries and take the qualities that are in Venus and make this a sustainable passion towards the same person, for example. I'll talk more about this, about the kind of life lessons that comes out of Venus with Aries towards the end of the episode. Another thing that can happen with Venus in Aries in the context of relationships is that Venus naturally can consider the emotions and the needs of other people. This is what the feminine and the receptive planets can do. But in this very self-oriented sign, it's hard for it to prioritize other people's needs. So we know this usually leads to relationship conflicts. So having heated, conflictual relationships can be part of the experiences of a Venus in Aries. Another thing, Aries can have a very competitive edge to it. You bring this into a relationship, you're asking for trouble because relationships are supposed to be about cooperation. It's not one man up ship of how I can do things better than you. It's very irritating being with someone like that in a relationship. You just can't feel comfortable. Venus in Aries is creating that kind of a discomfort for itself and for their partner. And naturally, Venus prefers to cooperate, not to compete. But here it is in the sign of Aries. And in a lot of ways, this weird drive that can be in the sign of Aries exhausts Venus, exhausts love, exhausts relationships. It creates discontent, disconnection. And I was saying the ruler of the sign of Aries is Mars. Mars is very happy with disconnecting things because now it freed it from the previous bonding or the way that it was bound. So now it's free to move to the next destination. That's not what Venus wants to do. But Mars wants that. And the sign of Mars, which is Aries, accommodates this. And Venus in Aries people could also have their own script based on the rest of the chart in terms of how a relationship should be like or how fast it should move. And then if someone moves off that kind of a script, they'll disconnect. They'll sever that relationship and their ties to it. Or if someone else is trying to impinge on their individuality, like this is what a partner ought to be, and a Venus in Aries is like, who are you to dictate to me? It's over right there and then. It's got that kind of a feel to it. But let's for a second talk about a few points where we could say once when one has learned, Venus can do some spectacularly cool stuff in the sign of Aries. For example, one of them is because the sign of Aries represents bravery. A lot of people are fearful of love. So Venus here can have a sense of courage about loving. I mean, it might have gone through 10 relationships that cause it hurt, but it still has that courage to have another person to love again. This is an important thing in life, not to become discouraged by the hurts that relationship and love can bring about. So in a lot of ways, Venus is willing to make emotional risks, is willing to actively pursue and to attain love. So yes, Venus naturally likes to be passive, but this is also an important aspect in life to have the courage to be vulnerable again. Because a lot of times in coming to love someone, we have to make ourselves vulnerable. So this is one point. Another thing, the sign of Aries is about passion. Venus has to do about creativity. We know with a lot of creatives, the furnace behind them is passion. A lot of times when you ask someone, why do you write? Why do you paint? Why do you make music? They don't really have an answer. It's just an urge, it's an inner urge and a passion that's driving them to pursue these creative endeavors. So when you have Venus in the sign of Aries, because of that passion and because of the creativity and the skills that come with it, they can be complementary in a lot of ways. And you know, Venus will take the script of Aries, and Venus is like, I'm enduring. I'm about fidelity. The sign is crazy. Like, it's kind of warlike. Venus is feeling the aggression. So Venus is like, okay, how can I take some things about myself and implement it here in this act, in this role? So in relationships, if Venus wants to enact that enduring factor that it has, it becomes a kind of that saying, or of a ride or die kind of a partner. It's got that kind of a mentality when it wants to sustain relationship, and it injects that passion behind it. So it's just going to meet all kinds of challenges in a relationship head on, very boldly. It's just unwavering about what it will do for its partner, for better or for worse, Bonnie and Clyde type of a situation. And in some ways here, the passion's just burning constantly. So that Aries factor is fueling Venus to love under all kinds of situations that normally seem strange or difficult. Another thing about Venus in Aries that's very cool, because this is an individualistic sign, so it's going to express itself as an individual, and Venus has to do with beauty and creativity. This person can have a very unique self-expression about their individual person and who they are. And they can bring that uniqueness, which is actually a kind of it's very authentic, it's very raw. They can bring that into a relationship too. What you see is also what you get. You can get this kind of a feel. They have an edge to them, Venus in Aries. And another thing is that when they are in relationships, you better not be wanting to plagiarize their sense of self, like who they are as an individual. And the beauty of it here is that they are also willing participants to kind of let you be you. And that they do that because they don't want you to infringe on their sense of individuality, because they want that freedom to be who they are and how they need to express themselves. And you inject a little bit of maturity with this over a lifetime. This is a Venus that knows how to uphold, honor, and respect what their partners like in their full, authentic sense of self. They're not trying to dictate to the other person in terms of how they ought to be. And generally this starts because they start to learn very early on, hey, I gotta let other people be them if I want to be myself. Because if I start enforcing this rule of how they ought to be, they're going to start doing that back to me. And I just can't deal with that. So this is actually a very cool thing that comes out of Venus in Aries, and especially over a lifetime when it gets a sense of maturity. It's very empowering for both people in a relationship to have this kind of a concept. They can just be their full, authentic self. Now we come to that. We have to discuss this in terms of the interaction of water and fire, because the element of Venus is water and the element of the sign of Aries is fire. So now we got the interaction of these two elements. And let's just consider for a second what fire is and its symbolic meaning, and what water is and what they're trying to do. Fire is the means to ignite, initiate, burn, light up, make things visible. It's about action, it's about leading, and there's a sense of spontaneity to it. So it's about energy, enthusiasm, passion, action. It's inceptive, it's dynamic, it's outward moving, and it illuminates. When we take the water element, on the other hand, is to nurture, is to blend things, to merge things. It's talking about emotional components. And if you think about emotions in general, they are blending. They're creating bonds between people. These are emotions that create a bond between us human beings and the objects of the world too, like humans relative to the objects of the world. Emotions, water has a sense of depth to it. It's about sensitivity, intuition. It has a sense of fluidity and adaptability to it. And then it dissolves and again merges things. And it's intramoving, it's introspective, it's unifying, it's healing, it flows, and it wants harmony. So going back to Venus moving out of Pisces, where it's exalted, is in a water sign. Venus itself is of the water element. So it's got everything that it needs to be able to do what it is that it does at its best. And then when it comes into the sign of Aries, into this fire sign, it's like a shock to the system. So it has to go from that state of merging and what had been dissolved into a state where it needs to ignite, initiate through some inceptive action, just individuate and pop out and pop forth. This is the shock to the system. In the sign of Pisces, it was all about how do we cooperate? How do we create union and a sense of oneness? And then suddenly Venus is in the sign of Aries, and Aries is like, how are you independent? How are you self-reliant? How do you do it yourself? Forget about other people. Forget what they say. Forget how they can help you. What can you do? So there's really no one here to cooperate with for Venus. And that's what Venus does. Venus is a relational planet. It constantly wants to engage with other people, cooperate with other people, establish connections. And Aries is like, no, it's me, myself, and I. You, yourself, and yourself. There's no one else. The kind of autonomy that Aries demands of Venus to have, it's difficult for Venus in the sign of Aries. And that critical degree is talking about this. How do you, through a lifetime of work, how do you become individuated? How do you do things yourself? How do you initiate and assert? In relationship dynamic, if you're creative in your creative endeavors, and all of it feels unnatural initially to Venus. So what does this do to Venus? One of the first thing, the water element has to do with emotions, even though the word emotion is a key signification for the moon. If we're going to talk about Venus as love and relationship and cooperation, we're talking about dealing with emotions, right? So when it comes into the sign of Aries, the kinds of things that is demanding of it because of its fire nature and then because of Venus's own water nature is going to create emotional volatility. So natives with this signature might spend a good portion of their young life dealing with a lot of emotional volatility. For example, that impulsive nature that's in Aries and the intensity that's there creates a lot of instability in relationships or in creative endeavors because Venus represents creativity. And one of the reasons for this emotional volatility is because Aries is demanding of Venus to act first, feel later, think later. So it can't process what it's doing. It has this instinct to act in the sign of Aries. And this can often lead to conflict and feelings of regret later. So there's a lot of trial and errors in life and through this transit till we understand this. So that we don't allow that impulsivity of Aries to create emotional volatility for us. Another thing that Venus in Aries can start to take on as a symbolic meaning is having difficulty in emotional depth till you learn about it, till you understand how deeply passion goes in the sign of Aries, and not just at some surface level thing where you're using passion to chase things. But initially in life, or as part of this transit's life lesson, we're trying to understand what it means to go past the surface. And let me explain why I'm saying this. In a lot of ways, when Venus is acting kind of dysfunctional in a chart in general, Venus can represent superficiality. So it's not talking about beauty in terms of how something is inherently, its composition is in a certain way that gives it that sense of beauty. It just creates this external surface level beauty to evoke that feeling, but it's not talking about the essence of a thing where the beauty is. And Aries is looking for surface level excitement before there's a sense of maturity there. That impulsivity is saying something about immaturity and just wanting instant gratification now. So one of the challenges here becomes about seeking deep connections with people. So we have to feel deeply. We have to go beyond these surface level ways of being. And you can see this with Venus in Aries, like keeping a relationship long term is initially difficult in life for a lot of people. And why? Because long-term relationships need that sustainability and it's patient. It needs you to be vulnerable, cooperate. And the script that Venus got from the get-go is not permitting it to do, it's not supporting it to do these kinds of things. So a person has to really dig deep to be able to get past all of this, and one can, and a lot of people do throughout a lifetime, but there are some trials, errors, tribulations till we get there. And with this transit too, we may very well experience such things. And then that impulsivity that's here, it can create a lot of feelings of burnouts for the native and for people that they're in relationship with. So when the excitement fades, there's nothing else fueling it. Or when relationships start to go through a little bit of stagnation, it gets a little bit boring, which is inevitable in every relationship. And if you've been in a relationship long enough, these patches can last for years. So Venus's solution here with that impatience and burnout is to reignite that cardinal thing of the signs coming in again, right? I want to go find a new relationship. I want to start a new creative project. So nothing ever really comes to its conclusion. It's like a sprinter who's keep sprinting the same strip. You know, it's like sprints from the beginning of the 100-yard line to the end, gets burnt out, slowly walks back to the beginning, and then redo the same thing. In life, at least we like to have a perception that there's some distance between point A and B, and it's long. The restarts from boredom and stagnation can be devastating in a Venus in Aries person's life. And in this transit too, we might find this as a very prominent feeling. You know, in Pisces, we were merging, we were connecting, we were becoming one, and you don't even know what was happening really because of all the planets that were up there, like Neptune and Rahu North Node. As soon as you come into the sign of Aries, the script's handed to you and you're like, wait a minute, who am I? This thing's so boring. I can't do this. My life's not moving forward. This person's actually my obstacle right now. I just feel like I'm not getting anywhere. So that feeling of stagnation's coming through, perhaps a feeling of boredom's coming through. And the solution is not always, okay, I want to break up with this person and start with a new person. Because with the new person, you're going to have the same problems. This is the nature of long-term relationships. Something that Venus in Aries has to learn through a lifetime in terms of how to have it, to slow down a little bit. I don't even know if you can slow down in the sign of Aries, but rest the way that you need to because you ignited, you initiated, you had that burst of energy, that dynamism that moves you forward. There's a burnout. You just have to rest and let the rest be a moment of patience rather than impatiently moving on, cutting things again, severing things. Yeah, so I don't know. Wanting constant stimulation is something that happens when we have Venus in the sign of Aries. And at some point, we have to find some stability in what it means to be devoted, which is that loyalty and fidelity. That Venus, that's what it's about. And then fire signs, because of that inceptive outward action orientation that they have, they can you can feel a sense of dominance almost, you know, because they're always setting the pace. And Aries, from that cardinal perspective, also has this feeling. And Venus is about harmony. So it just kind of becomes dominance over harmony here too, when you take the water and the fire element together. And it can override Venus's, that cooperative nature that it has. And that dominance can be like, hey, I need to prioritize myself. It's self-love. It's about me. If I don't do it for myself, who's going to do it for me? Instead of trying to create some mutual understanding, hey man, other people want to love you too, but we got to meet them somewhere at that halfway point where there's some compromise and cooperation. So wanting to dominate and self-assert becomes a prominent theme too. And that dominance and going against the harmonizing element of Venus is coming through both the elemental differences and the fact that the sign of Aries is a cardinal sign. I have to take another break. The voice. It's getting groggy. I'll be right back. All of that said, I don't want to leave it on a surface level about water and fire because both of these elements have certain things in common too. And I just want to quickly discuss that because when I say that a person can get a sense of maturity with age and they do things different, is because they understand how to make things complementary, where there's synergy, where there's resonance. And there is some resonance and synergy between water and fire, even though it's like water puts out fire. You know, they seem to be in opposition. One of the things is that both water and fire symbolically represent purification. And I was saying that Venus in the sign of Aries can become superficial or act on a surface level because of that impulsivity and gratification that can come through. But when you think about what fire does, fire burns the appearance of things. It's going to leave something, the essence of something. So it's taking away that superficial shell of something and getting to the core of it. In the Vedic tradition, fire is what purifies, and it's the means to communicate to the higher realm, essence to essence, the individual soul to the ultimate soul, to the gods. So fire in itself is the means for purifying and getting to the depth and essence of things. And when you think about what water does the exact same thing. Look at a river going between a canyon, through a canyon. You can see the erosion marks. Water over time also purifies. It's doing the exact same thing. It's dissolving and it's eroding the superficial aspect of things. It's another way of getting into the essence. And we could say water itself is the essence of life, or it's the essence of existence. And through that erosion, as the rocks are eroding, they're kind of dissolving into the water. So both of them are ultimately trying to get to a depth. And we could say Venus in Aries, if someone has a planet here, especially in those critical degrees, it could be that through all of that fire, all of that ignition, all of that initiation, it's like digging. It's going deeper and deeper into the essence of something. So this is something we have to consider about the signature and what these elements are ultimately trying to do. They're both trying to get to the essential truth and the core essence of something. And relationships, love, union, creativity, these are Venus's forte. So it's trying to get to the essence of what these things mean. What is true beauty? You know, sometimes you look at someone's face and you see them and you're like, oh my God, they're so beautiful. Sometimes you look at a person, you don't see a face. You see the essence of that person and you love that soul. You love that essence, you know, and beauty that's skin deep, which applies to all objects of the world, will deteriorate with time. It's the ability to see the core essence of your beloved, is to see their soul, no matter what the external appearance looks like. And that's what fire and water are both permitting us to do in the long run of life. So it's actually a beautiful combination in that sense. So in some ways, Venus in Aries is the means to purify the self, is the means to purify relationships over a lifetime. And because of that freedom that's in Aries, and the way the native wants freedom for themselves and the way they have to eventually learn to give that freedom to their partner, is about looking past the external shell of things and superficial expectations, and even some delusions that Venus could come to have about merging with other people in the sign of Pisces, which I discussed in the previous episodes. So the essence, that authentic core, that is the self, that is the soul, can come through in this interaction of water and fire. And I will make another episode. As I'm talking through this episode, I'm saying that I need to do another one about just Venus's retrograde cycle this year, because at some point Venus is going to come into a Kazemi point with an exalted sun in the sign of Aries, where they are at the exact same degrees and Venus is at the heart of the sun. So it's kind of revealing this truth for us. But I think I will discuss that in another video to do it justice, because this is already getting a bit long and there's still a little bit to go. And just to stay on this topic for one more second, we do have something that's more like a superficial passion. The way, for example, we use other people as a point to ignite us. You know, I've seen this in my life where people want to break up with their partner because they want to initiate something new in their life. So they're kind of using that act of severing, even the act of harming another, to gain some sort of a momentum and an energy to redirect their life. There's just not enough tools in that toolkit to know how to do that and to maintain the relationship. But when Venus gets a sense of maturity in the sign of Aries, it will see passion as an internal inner flame like a furnace that is constantly burning. It's always there. It doesn't need to sever and sacrifice in order to initiate something, in order to move and to act. So in a lot of ways, Aries is teaching Venus how to have or how to tap into its own inner drive and how to direct this inner heat with focus, intention, and purpose. These are the things that are related to fire. So Venus is getting a lesson in terms of how to tap in to the depth of love through passion in this way. I know if you subscribe to that school of thought about reincarnation, that every life is a kind of an evolution, an act of work in progress towards some kind of a perfection. And if the perfection is the ultimate consciousness, how do you eventually get to a point where you can merge and be with that ultimate consciousness as it is? So one could say that Venus in previous lives, or even in this lifetime, in the earlier part of the life, has been configured to act impulsively. It's been conditioned to be reactive in terms of connecting with people, being in relationship, creating union, which inevitably always brings it to its breaking point. And Aries is striving to purify Venus of that early conditioning by showing it its constant demand for action, movement, something new. Because we get hurt. I don't care if you have Venus in Aries and you feel bold and you feel ride or die, tough, rugged. You still hurt. Every time a relationship breaks, even if you're the one who initiated the breakup, it leaves at least a little scar on you. And how many little scars can you have in life before you actually feel deformed? You know, so it's showing Venus how to infuse that emotional aspect of the water with its drive and all the things that Venus needs. Or maybe it's showing Venus that, hey, you came into this world or you get conditioned to have an emotional armor around yourself. You're always fighting for your independence. You're always fighting to be self-reliant. You don't want anyone to help you. And Aries is showing through all those little scars, all kinds of barriers that the person's actually setting up for themselves and for other people, which is not allowing them to connect. Aries is showing, hey, understand your own authentic needs and your sense of self and the individual that you are. And usually the lessons that we learn about ourselves, we can start to empathize with other people and implement those same rules with other people. So in a sense, Venus in the sign of Aries is starting to learn through its own self-experiences. And when it learns and it gets into a relationship, then it can implement those rules in that relationship also. And it's this that allows it over a lifetime to have sustained relationships. And then go into that planetary dynamics in terms of friendships or relationships. And I said it earlier, Venus is the god or goddess of love, and Mars and its sign of Aries is related to the god of war. And these are actually, we like to call such things myth, but they're actually talking about principles that are about opposing forces. Venus as the kind of organizing principle that it is, as the field of interaction that it is, as that goddess of love, is trying to create connections and unions, as I've said this a number of times in the past videos. It's about, this principle is trying to bridge gaps between things. And by doing this, it's creating a kind of a composition that's harmonized. So there's a sense of beauty emerging out of it. Mars, on the other hand, thrives on severing and conflict. It thrives on competition and conquest. And it's about asserting itself even over other people. So we can see this god of war and this goddess or god of love have intrinsic challenging qualities when they come to interact with each other. Like when Venus comes into the sign of Aries, it gets the script, and the script says, act with passion, Venus. Love is an adventure. It's an all-consuming pursuit. Just go pursue it. Go conquer him, her, they. Just go conquer it. The script says, like, the enjoyment when it comes to relationship and in this pursuit, it's just all about the chase. That's where the excitement's at. Aries wants Venus to have visceral, raw instantaneous kind of a pleasure when it comes to love and relationships and creativity too. But when we go back to the mythologies of these two energies, principles, gods, goddesses, they have an affinity to each other in a strange way. Like in the Greek mythology, Aphrodite and Aries are lovers. Eris, they're lovers. They have this passionate thing about each other. I mean, they can't really be with each other, but they're constantly trying to reconcile this opposite. That's what the story is demonstrating. In some ways, love, the concept of love, which is Venus, softens the harshness of life and the war of life, which is Mars. And if you've ever been in love, like a long-term relationship, life has a very funny way of doing things. And I think it's the core nature of existence itself that's reiterating, reverberating through life, which is about this constant change and shift. So there's no value judgment in terms of this is a bad thing that happens. I think this is just the nature of existence, which is change. So there's constant flux, shift, and movement. So any composition that's been made, it is bound to disintegrate. It is bound to be separated, be dispersed, and no longer be connected and unified. And if you want to make things remain connected and unified, you have to fight. You have to fight in a relationship. I'm not saying fight with your partner, but you have to fight for that connection in a lot of ways. People will come between you two. So there's that external enticement and the instant gratification to move that way, to go that way. But do you have it in you to fight for your relationship, to stay, to remain, to sustain that composition, which is that relationship? So love requires war. And sometimes in life, some wars that we choose are for love. So it makes it more meaningful. It's not just violent and gruesome. So we're talking about reconciling the opposite and how they are actually necessary. They are the same side of the same coin almost, if, at worst on the other end of the coin. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. I'm just trying to think right now, even in creative endeavors, when you're in a state of flow, for example, there's a very beautiful feeling with it. But to have that state, you have to fight through so many things. Hold on, let me try to find the book. This is one of the books that I really liked, and I always get this as a Christmas gift for my artist friends, by Stephen Pressfield. There's truly a war to art. The art aspect of this is Venus. The war aspect of it is Mars. And creativity, the thing that it demands of you to show up every day and to be on top of your things and to be disciplined, it's Mars coming to intersect with Venus. If you want to be an artist, you better be courageous in a lot of ways. Because a lot of times, for example, as a writer, I don't know what I'm going to write, but I cannot give myself the luxury of not knowing what I don't know what I'm going to write. I don't know what I'm going to write, so I'm not going to show up. You show up not knowing anything. It's an act of courage almost. You just do it. Venus and Aries can have that as a slogan. Just do it. Just show up. Be courageous. And I think the point here is to learn how to do it with the least amount of friction and resistance and fighting at some point, to enjoy it too, because Venus is about that. So in summary, the blessing of Venus and Mars coming into some sort of a connection with each other is that we have to eventually learn in life that maintaining love, falling in love can be very easy because it's a matter of chemistry a lot of time. But maintaining love for a lifetime will require a kind of a war. Venus learns, with all of its softness and all of its receptivity, how to maintain these connections and to fight for it. And perhaps this is one of the life lessons. This is why Venus is in the sign of Aries. Now, I've got two more subheadings that I want to quickly go over with Venus in the sign of Aries. And I just want to emphasize how I just took the discussion somewhere where it's making it pleasant that Venus is in the sign of Aries. But these natives, and through this transit too, we're going to have to confront some, let's say, shadow aspects of the self with this kind of a placement. So things that we have to be mindful, because these are the kinds of things that Venus in Aries can signify, are, for example, impulsivity in relationship. So rushing into love, short-lived infatuation, prioritizing personal desires. So there's a kind of a self-centeredness that can come as a shadow aspect of Venus in Aries. There can be, and with this, there can be definitely difficulty empathizing with other people because it's always about me and what I need and how I need to do it. That's not a good way to be. And there can be a lot of desire for instant gratification. And when one doesn't get it, or if it doesn't come around, the person's constantly dealing with feelings of irritation, for example. It makes a person reactive, it makes them conflictual. Like if a person's expectations are not promptly met right now, because this is what my individual self wants, it just creates a lot of conflict, and this can bring about a lot of aggression with Venus, the soft, beautiful planet, in the sign of Aries. Another shadow aspect of Venus in Aries is initially a lot of difficulty with commitment. There's so much fear of being restricted, not being free. Just feeling like I want my independence, and this person's, it feels like other people are intruders in our lives, and this is always gonna damage relationships. And on one hand, this kind of a placement can create relationships into a battlefield, combat zone, where it's like everyone's at competition with each other. And you can also get jealousy and possessiveness here too, oddly enough. You get more of this quality in the other sign of Mars, which has to do with the sign of Scorpio. But in the sign of Aries too, I mean, like, if you're under the impression that you gotta win against your partner, when they win, which inevitably happens in life, then you can get a sense of jealousy here. So it's a shadow side of Venus and Mars signs. And honestly, if one doesn't catch themselves here and over a lifetime improve and get some self-mastery in relational dynamics, literally we could say that this is a kind of a, I don't want to be crude here in using this term, but there's a underdeveloped emotional intelligence that it's like always action over reflection, over some contemplation, understanding why are we reactive? Why do we just have this impulse and we act on it? We have to understand this. And when we don't understand it, we can't emotionally grow. We kind of remain stunted, like a child who has a temper tantrum when they don't get what they want to get, when they're not the way that they want to be. And Venus wants to compromise. So it's inviting us over a lifetime to understand this and to grow and understand where the reactivity is coming from. And part of this undeveloped emotional intelligence is also about avoiding vulnerability. So every time things become a little too emotional, when another person asks you for some staying power, the person puts their guard up. They don't want to be vulnerable. They start to push other people away, sever their ties, and they put on this facade of strength. Like, I'm tough. I don't care. I don't feel it. What do you mean? Over the long haul of life, these things hurt us more than safeguard us. So we need to develop emotional maturity about these facets of life if we haven't gained it yet. And if we don't gain mastery over it, it's just a lifetime of tumultuous relationships, pursuits, frequent conflicts, misunderstandings, and eventual disconnection. And one of the most beautiful things about being human and having the kind of capacity that we have for love is to be with another person for as long as life permits, because they become the keeper of our narrative. Aries wants a great sense of itself. A lot of times, having a lover, having a partnership, having other people who can reflect those shared experiences is what grounds life and what gives life a lot of meaning. So if we're constantly severing one relationship after another, our own lives start to feel disjointed. there's not one person who can reflect back with you on that great joy or that great loss of life. There's tremendous amount of meaning in that. So taking pride in jumping from one relationship to another, and if it adds up to a lifetime of experience of this, the person is left with a very disjointed narrative, which is very unsettling. So we have to become self-aware. We have to develop empathy at some point, cultivate patience, embrace vulnerability, and balance independence with cooperation. Venus in Aries will never have the luxury to fully cooperate or to fully for Aries to be independent. These two elements have come together and they have to find some sort of a collaborative effort to be able to meld and merge these components. So you can be independent and you can be cooperative. You can hold two contradictory ideas at the same time. That's what being human is anyway. A lot of us are not living what we think is our ideal self or ideal life. And in those thoughts, in those theories of the mind about how life ought to be, you cannot live until you are that person, but in reality, you're actually living. So even in theory and practice, we can hold these contradictory elements and make them work. So a life lesson then for Venus in Aries, how do you balance independence with connection, is to understand that relationships don't require us to sacrifice our sense of individual person, which is the core essence of being independent. You are your own individual by nature. The minute that you were born, you were differentiated from another person. Our entire wiring is that way. We don't have to try so hard. And in fact, the best relationships are when two people are fully themselves, their own authentic selves, and they just come, and in the middle that they compromise. They don't have to compromise their integrity and their sense of self. They just have to compromise on events, ways of being in the day throughout the years, but not themselves. And in my opinion, the greatest sense of intimacy comes when two people are themselves, because you're always constantly discovering the other person because they're not you. You don't fully know them. They will always surprise you. They will always give you that Aries element of wanting to be excited. Aries is also teaching Venus, because Venus, I said earlier, has that magnetism. So it can sometimes be passive and expect things to be attracted to it. And Aries is actually teaching Venus that, you know what? Love in itself is not a passive act. It's active. It always involves stepping out of one's own comfort zone. It involves effort to keep things together. So over a lifetime, Venus is learning a very valuable lesson here. It's that when things are harmonized, when things are in a state of union, be comfortable, enjoy. There is the pleasure. But only after, when we have brought everything together, we fought for it. It's stabilized. Now there's something to enjoy. So Aries can teach this lesson to Venus. I know the element of fire has a lot to do with the sense of purpose because it illuminates, is an illuminating factor. And Venus and Aries can learn how to transform the passion that's in Aries, and because of the fire that's there, to a kind of a purpose. So it becomes a force for creation. It becomes a force for inspiration. It can do this, Venus in Aries. Another thing that Venus and Aries can teach the native is that you have to learn how to embrace the duality of love and conflict in a lot of ways. And it's actually not a duality, because those conflicts, because you want to be your authentic self and the other person want to be their authentic self, they're actually moments of getting to know another person, and it's actually deepening the connections. Because in those moments, you have to find out what the middle ground is. It's pushing both people's boundaries. I don't want to bring Saturn here, but it's showing where one person begins and ends. And now there's this separation. There's this individual person and there's this individual person. But what's the ingredients that can keep you both together in this middle space that's in between you two? It's really evolving and growing us when we deal with other people and we see like, I can't compromise with them. And there's that conflict aspect of it. Love and conflict will grow us over a lifetime if we know how to deal with it and it doesn't become toxic and crazy. And another thing that Aries could teach Venus when Venus is there, sorry, my computer was fading off. When Venus is there, is we always think about the feminine principle as super passive and it's just shy, but there's a lot of strength to it. Like think of a lioness and their cubs. They are super protective. In the Vedic tradition, we have Durga, we have Kali, the Shakti of a lot of the deities. These are not just these passive, flimsy, whimsical ways of being. They're powerful. So when Venus goes into the sign of Aries, Aries can show Venus as that feminine principle, that power that's within the feminine principle. This is something very valuable too. And I don't care if you're male, female, or what your gender identification is. This masculine and feminine principle is in all of us. It's like inward moving feminine principle, outward moving masculine principle. But Venus as the feminine principle is learning what its inherent power is also in the sign of Aries. And there's a kind of a empowerment with expressing that feminine principle or quality or aspect of ourselves. And it can be active, it can be bold, and it can be very unapologetic. In fact, a lot of Venus in Aries people have an unapologetic kind of a sexiness about them. When you mix the feminine and the masculine principle, they are boldly sexy. I don't have another word for it. I'm gonna maybe do a video montage at the end of this video and put some natives who have this signature, people that a lot of people know, so you can just get a feel for what this, I hope I just didn't say Venus in Pisces. Venus in Aries is like. Another lesson could be, hey man, you need to learn how to love yourself. Because the sign of Aries is about the individual self, and the sign of Venus has to do with love, which ultimately self-love is the foundation for all healthy relationships. If we don't know how to love ourselves, if we don't, and to love ourselves, I don't mean in that like vain vanity kind of way. No, I'm talking about feeling integrated and connected and merged and harmonized with it. When we have that inner sense and we know what it feels like, then we know how to externalize that and implement it with other people and how to recreate that kind of a love. But if we are just some ugly, disintegrated, uncomposed thing on the inside, and if we don't know anything else, we can't be anything other than that out in the world too. So Aries making Venus kind of self-focused in terms of what it means to love is also cultivating inner love, which then can externalize itself in loving other people. Another thing that can become a life lesson here is, how do you navigate intensity? Love and relationships, the creative process can be super intense. For example, that domain of life where the sign of Aries is sitting in terms of the house that it belongs to, there can be a certain kind of an intensity there. So Venus could be learning how to take and channel that intensity into something that's productive, in being productive in life, in creating experiences that are very enriching. So this could be another lesson that's coming out of here. And other things we could say about things that can get cultivated and the beautiful aspects that could come out of Venus in Aries could include such things as being bold and assertive and yet still knowing how to have empathy and being sensitive. This is a very cool quality, human beings who have this. How do you harmonize independence with unions? Have passion with purpose. Be fearless in vulnerability. Have an energized sense of creativity. Have emotional depth and at the same time have a dynamic expression about it. How to have a charismatic presence, which charismatic here, I'm looking at it in terms of having self-confidence. And at the same time, having warmth that can invite other people in, which is complementing that magnetic attractive quality that is in Venus. Have a sense of empowered femininity, whether if you're male, female, or any gender identification. And ultimately, how to integrate love and action together. Because our first impression of love is just hand in hand, still in an embrace. But love, as I said earlier, requires a lot of action. So I'm going to leave the video off here. And as I said, I will come back to talk about Venus's retrograde in the sign of Aries and what that means in the cycle of Venus. But this video should just be a general scratch the surface of how does Venus act in the sign of Aries? What does it mean when it's there? What is it signifying? So I'll leave you guys with that. I hope you're having a beautiful day. Sending you much love. Till next time.